Don't shit on the venue or the producer, because the venue and producer don't need to have you. They can make more money on a quiz night, so that's nice. Don't shit on the other comics. They're your friends. They're going to be the ones who are going to uplift you and offer you the sitcom deal when they are a little bit ahead of you. They're going to ask for you to open for them, so don't shit on the other comics as well. Don't shit on the audience. It's not their problem. They're having a bad time. It's your fault. They're having a bad time, not theirs, so don't shit on them. And ultimately, when you get off stage, before or after, don't shit on yourself. Talk yourself up before, after, and during the gig, and otherwise you're inviting feedback you don't want.
Hey, kia ora team. Today's episode is brought to you by Mr. Vintage. Mr. Vintage is New Zealand's most iconic t-shirt brand. Doesn't matter if it's a local pop cultural phenomenon, a sporting event, or even a New Zealand personality, there's every chance that Mr. Vintage has made a t-shirt for them and some product for it. Kiwi owned since 2004, selling Kiwiana t-shirts and gifts online. There's even a range of king sizes for us bigger fellas. Today, Mr. Vintage and us want to give you an extra special. How about 20% off any men's t-shirt? All you need to do is go to mrvintage.co.nz. In the checkout, use the promo code FUNNY, FUNNY, and you will get 20% off any men's t-shirt. Head to mrvintage.co.nz, enter the promo code FUNNY at checkout for 20% off any men's t-shirt. Thanks for joining me. I appreciate you coming on board today. It's a fun time, Neil. I'm delving into some of your comedy since we've been talking in more recent times, and it's really interesting. I'm really excited to have a chat with you about sort of life, the universe, and everything as according to Neil Thornton. So welcome to Let's Talk Funny, and let's do it. Let's either use funny voices or just talk about comedy. Personally, I'd rather just talk about comedy than funny voices, but the title could mean anything, couldn't it?
I'm always a fan of that kind of comedy. I just don't do it myself. So
tell me a bit about you. You came to New Zealand about a decade ago, 8 or 9 years ago. You came here for
about 9 years ago in
stayed.
January. My husband and I got married in 2013. We met in New York City. We met in 2013 and we met in 2007, got married in 2013 and came to New Zealand on our honeymoon and just started chatting. Started talking. Wow, this would be kind of a fun place to spend some time, to live. He's a doctor and heard that they were looking for doctors here in New Zealand periodically. And he ended up applying for several jobs and ended up getting one in Wellington. And that was supposed to be a 6-month trip and ended up being 9 years ago. So moved here in 2014. And now got a house and dogs and comedy career and comedy school and all that. And
dog, big about dogs. Tell me about your dog. What kind of dog have you got? That's the most important part of this conversation.
2 Alaskan Malamutes, giants. They're about 7 or 8 years old. They're my life. They're everything. Well, I don't know if you want to share pictures of them. They're probably more famous than I am. I posted one Instagram reel that is now up to, I think, 200,000 views and 180,000 views on TikTok. Nothing anywhere close to whatever I've gotten on and wherever I've gotten as far as exposure in comedy. They're part of thousands of tourist photos. Whenever I walk them anywhere wherever I walk them anywhere popular, everyone's always taking pictures of the dogs. So
wow, that's those things are huge. Basically, they look like huskies, big husky dogs.
Yeah, giant huskies. They're, as a breed, they're more thicker, more fuller build. They're not quite the same temperament as huskies, but they're willful and somewhat wild and kind of wonderful, very
talkative. Are your guys talkative?
Yeah, they are. Not, as I said, to the extent of huskies. There are a lot of woo-woo-woos when it's dinner time or walk time. So we get a talking to every morning.
I'm excited to show some people some footage from yours, which we'll seamlessly cut in here. I've got a border collie, and it's funny
Uh-huh.
you talk about being more famous than you. I do a daily, or not daily, but a live stream news show, and often Nala's in the studio with me, and we get people coming on the live stream saying, "Can you please show us the dog?" And I'm like, "Oh, well, we're talking news, but
Hmm.
sure."
Yeah.
Here she is, and I actually, because she's smart and well trained, and a really good one, I've actually contacted a dog agent to see, because I'm in Dunedin, right? So there's lots of filming going on up in Central Otago,
Hmm.
and I'm like, you never know. And I did have that little thought. I was like, you're trying to build these careers, you're trying to do stuff online, digital content. Imagine if your dog was the one thing that got you that big paycheck. I don't know if that'd be a good thing or a bad thing, but it might be a
Yeah.
thing.
But they've got, yeah, as far as, yeah, it would be I basically, my whole life is the dogs. When it's not stand up, it's 2 walks a day, feeding the dogs, cuddling the dogs, taking them to vet appointments, all of that. That's just my life right now. So.
Tell me about your stand up. I think I jotted down, I watched a little bit of your stand up online, and I saw you describe yourself as, let me get this quote, doing angry gay comedy.
Oh, yeah. Well, I
Is
mean,
that,
that's sort of
is that your lane?
summed up by other people as such. I don't know. I like,
Okay.
I definitely love to explore the edges of emotion, to have fun getting furious on stage. What I learned moving here was I was, my material is quite intelligent and smart, but often by New York standard, or by whatever standards, kind of disconnected more about the words than any of the emotions. And as I started
Right.
connecting more emotionally to the material, started to, engage and be angry when I was angry, or it became a lot more fun for me, a lot more cathartic for me, and audiences really began to enjoy it that much more. So,
It's funny that anger, because I was talking to Jeremy Elwood a few episodes ago, and he's seen sort of as a bit of a political comedian,
mhm.
and he doesn't kind of classify himself as a political comedian, but he says, I talk about what makes me angry, and politics makes me angry.
Yeah.
And so that's part of what comes out on stage. It looks like he's, astutely political, which he is,
Uh-huh.
but he doesn't necessarily see himself as a political comedian. Do you see yourself as sort of an LGBT comedian? Is that sort of your lane? Is that where you are? Or is it just a way for you to get some of those angry thoughts out?
I think, yeah, it really depends on the day and who
Right.
I'm talking to, and and the day, what material I'm doing. Certainly a comedian who happens to be gay, but it is such kind of a part of my identity. It's also
For
kind of
sure.
how I'm seen than my own self-perception. Like, if a straight comic gets up on stage, talks about his wife, talks about dating, talks about
Yeah.
girls, talks about sex, then they're just a comedian. I talk about my husband, I talk about sex, I talk about dating, then I'm a gay comic. And often, do you have to talk so much about being gay? I'm like, no, you talked about your wife, I talked about my husband, I'm just talking about shit. It's certainly part of it. I think, having a point of view which is often trying to, move the needle on homophobia, or move the needle on old shitty stereotypes a little bit, is part of my point of view on stand up. But also, look, I'm also neurotic and ADHD and angry about a lot of shit and socially anxious and constantly struggling with my weight and constantly struggling with my self-perception. These are all things that come out on stage as well, whether that's tied to sexuality or not. Sometimes no, sometimes yeah.
Were you doing comedy before you came to New Zealand? And if you
Yeah.
were, this lane that you're in, this lane that you've been put in on some level as the angry gay comedian, is there a different response in New Zealand to those themes than there was, say, in New York?
Not really at all. I think, funny's funny no matter where you are, and being
Yeah.
authentic is funny no matter where you are. I think places where, I was doing stand up in New York for about 5 years before coming here. I took a comedy class. I moved to New York City, met my husband, was working, took a comedy class, and kind of got the bug, around 2009. And started really heavily pursuing open mics and gigs and as many shows as I possibly could. And the fun of New York was you're allowed to, there's the place where you can do 3 shows a night. You can do 2 open mics a night. So you can be on stage every single night and be hanging out with comics every single night to develop, which is amazing for developing your craft. And it's getting better that way in New Zealand, even though it wasn't initially. When I first got here, you could get a rummy Monday once every couple of months. But New Yorkers like to think of themselves as more sophisticated than New Zealanders, but they're not
Right.
necessarily. And also, yeah, I don't know. Funny's funny. I've become a different comedian than I was in New York. It's very the New York thing to be kind of emotionally checked out, like a little bit more over the room or over the. And it was very much a no. It's very much a no. If you go to open mics locally in New Zealand, it's very much a young comedian thing. Is to well, I'm not.
Yep.
If you don't laugh, I don't care because I don't really care either. And it's so it to feel less engaged. So coming here, I've just gotten to be a better comedian than I was when I was in New York. So it's hard to judge. Also, when I go to small towns or soccer clubs in the middle of nowhere and do these little touring gigs in RSA halls in Featherston, if I try to pander, if I try to soften my material, if I try to de-gay the material or straighten up the material, audiences don't like it as much. If I give the audiences the respect that I would give a New York audience, the same material I would give to a New York audience, they're going to respond in kind, assuming they're intelligent, assuming they're smart, assuming they're, in a lot of cases, not homophobic.
Yeah.
And the game I play often is, yeah, everyone out there in the world is homophobic, but you guys in Winton, you're not homophobic at all. You guys are cool, therefore we can hang. And so response wise, I don't know, different. And it really also depends on, am I in a RSA in Featherston or am I in the Fringe bar? But funny's funny.
If you're in the RSA, or if you're in Winton, which is Central Otago for people who don't know, if you are in that area, are people coming to see you knowing you? Or are
No.
you going to a pub where there happens to be comedy on? Like, because if you've got an audience that's your quote unquote fans or people who know you, then that's what they're paying for. Or are these people just turning up for a comedy night and you're there?
For the most part, people are showing up for a comedy night. So a lot of my small town gigs, I'm either in a lineup or I'm opening for somebody. Like I opened for Elwood and and Mike King way back when, and so I'm opening for other comics, or I was when I first got here. And even then, yeah, I'm not that well known in New Zealand. People aren't necessarily coming to see me. When it's a Fringe Fest show, like a Dunedin Fringe or something, then, big old gayness is part of the advertising, is part of the,
sure.
right, big homo comic is coming. Fine, but otherwise, I'm just another face on the poster 99% of the time. No, I'm not particularly well known outside of
I think
comedy.
didn't I read in your bio that you've done like the beer festival or something? Because if
Yeah.
you have, I'm like, can I while you're here as a professional,
Sure.
can I get some advice on the beard?
Yeah.
Is it rocking okay? Am I doing okay with my beard?
Yeah, you're doing amazing with the beard. The beard's
good.
great. Well done. Good. Yeah, everybody is
Thank you.
equally as all the bears. I was trying to make a point the other night on stage about something about like all the gay stereotypes you see on TV. No, most of us are guys who work in IT, big guys with beards who work in IT in some form or another. We're not, we're mostly big old nerds, and or at least that's most of my friends. But yeah, so there are various subcultures in the queer community. I have been friends with and kind of part and enjoy hanging out with the bear community, which has events in New York and Provincetown and California and Spain. And that's just fun party events. And also, particular bar nights that are dedicated to that in New York. And so early on in my career, trying to niche myself or just get butts and seats just to sell tickets, I would do comedy shows in tandem with whatever New York Bear Festival or Provincetown Bear Festival. So I moved here, and about a year after moving here, I said, okay, it's Bear Weekend. What do how do I get a show? And it's been now 8 years, and it's an incredibly popular show. It always sells out the classic. Comedians are dying to do it. And yeah, I'm trying to showcase LGBT comics, but also people I think gay people would like. So, which included Correos, which included Correos at one point, which included, So,
do you think that if I was trying to get some like extra traction in a particular community, that the look for me, I mean, am I honey potable?
There you
could
go.
I do some honey
Absolutely.
pudding?
Yeah, yeah. There you go.
Yeah?
Absolutely. Yeah,
Okay.
yeah, yeah.
It's good to know. It's really good to know.
There you go.
Um, I was thinking, you said you started comedy maybe 2009 in New York.
Mhm.
Name dropping question. Did you kind of started, because that's 15 years ago, give or take,
Yeah.
close to it. Did you start with anyone around that time that's blowing up, that Netflix special? Did you have any people
Well,
running
yeah,
around with you at the
if
time who have done it?
if you're doing open mics, you are, if you're doing open mics, and also I was producing a bar show, and
Right.
comics of all levels are, more than what I ran this shit open, not even open mic, but it was like three comics each doing 15 minutes at a shitty gay bar in the ass end of the West Village. And all these incredible people would show up to do the gig. And even though the audience necessarily wasn't always there, sometimes it would be, comics performing for, two drunks in a corner. But the people that did that gig were, Mark Norman, Emma Willman, Mateo Lane,
Well,
Tim Dillon on Netflix now. Let's see, I think Michelle Wolf did the gig once. I think, yeah, I name, people around, people who are in my, just ahead of me in my class, as it were, like just a
yeah.
couple of years ahead, who are starting to get traction, who I did a fuck ton of shows with, Mark Norman and Emma Willman and, Mateo Lane, with, any number of people who were now Netflixy, good folks. And also, like, if you did bringer shows in New York, I don't know if you're aware of the phenomenon, but the phenomenon of the bringer show is the mainline comedy clubs don't make their money off of headliners. They really make their money off of up and coming comics, doing comedy classes, doing open mics where you had to buy two
Right.
beers, doing also what they call bringer shows, which were, you could perform if you brought X number of people, anywhere from 3 people to 15 in some cases.
Yeah.
And so Gotham Comedy Club would do this, and Caroline's, and like all these comedy clubs would do this. And so but I did a few of them because they gave you really great tapes. They gave you really great recordings and a really good audience, and often some professional traction. It was often your audition for a club sometimes. And so I would do these, and then big name comics would show up because the audience was hot, and they would show up and do a set 10 minutes. And I got bumped by more big names in New York in my first year of doing comedy. It was always because I was new, and they'd be like, "Oh, I know you're on next, but Jim Gaffigan wants to do a spot, or Mike Birbiglia
Yeah.
wants to do a spot." And I would always say, like, "Hey, Jim Gaffigan just opened for me." And
You've talked a couple of times about when you're teaching, and you said that you did a comedy class in New York as well.
mhm,
I'm quite intrigued. I mean, what I'm trying to do with this podcast is talk to comedians about comedy. You're
sure.
someone who, as I read it, it's your comedy school. The New Zealand
Yeah.
Comedy School is yours. It's your baby. You run it.
Mhm.
The contact email address is your email address, so it's
Yeah.
yours. All the comments from the students who have gone through are like, Neil's amazing. So they're all about you. So tell me about your comedy school. Because I've heard comedians say
You can't
that
teach
you,
comedy.
you can't teach comedy. Yeah,
Yeah.
I've heard that from many of, I listen to a
Mhm.
lot of podcasts and I spend a lot of time in that world.
Mhm.
But because this is about talking to comedians about comedy, what more to talk about than how to learn to be funny, if that's even a possible thing? So first of all,
Yeah.
let's talk about your comedy school. Why did you start up a comedy school, and how does that sort of work? And secondly, let's talk about that whole concept of, can you teach funny? If someone's innately not funny, can you teach them the art of comedy, the
Mhm.
skills of comedy, the to have the perfect swing, so then that they can make good contact with a joke on stage?
Yeah. So the history of the school, all right, two-part history of the school. Can we teach funny? And that's like, we could talk about that for the next hour and a half for sure. I'll just start teaching you shit that I teach in class. The history of the school is, I've been a teacher for ever since I started teaching SAT classes in 1989. So is why I've been a teacher of some form or another for going on 30 some years now. I've loved teaching, taught English, composition, taught math. I often were test prep, which is teaching people how to take tests in the US. Would often learn content like quadratics or trigonometry or pre-calc just so that I could teach it. Like, I love
Cool.
teaching people, tutoring people, and taught writing, composition, English for years and years and years. And so I'm just kind of, anytime I get a group of people together or a willing audience, somehow I end up teaching them stuff. So I had, as part of my website, just this writing manual that I had put together for my own use, and just popped it on the back of my neilthornton.com website, which is just like, all right, here, do some free writing exercises, and these are things you could write about, and here's how to craft it into a joke. And it was just the writing side of comedy, and it was my own like checkpoints I had pulled from thousands of books on stand-up, of not necessarily formulas, but just inspiration for,
Right.
if I'm sitting down to write, what the fuck can I write about? Because almost always it's never. So I had that up and was running just some writing groups, and everyone was always telling me that they wanted actual like stage time feedback in their, I was teaching purely writing generation stuff, and people were like, well, yeah, but why don't you teach the whole thing? And it was an experiment about 5-6 years ago, 2018, I guess, where I put 8 people together, advertised the class, got 10, 11 people together, and started running them through a similar model to what I had in New York, with just a little more hands-on, one more class, one more writing meeting. And it, I learned how to give better feedback over time, learned how to give better feedback, how to be better in the writing sessions, how to run people through the process of turning their raw material into jokes. A little bit based on my own experience, the reading I've done. I've been a student of stand-up ever since I was 2. Like, we always had, everything from Steve Martin and George Carlin and Shelley Berman and Lily Tomlin albums in my house my entire life. So I've been a student of the art forever. And then, I ran the class, and people were really successful out of it. I think like maybe 4 people in my first class are still actively now very good friends who are peers on the scene, doing the thing. Miranda Camden and Salmia Hadermath are both, the 2 who come to mind, who I just was performing with this week. But, and then, so it started, just largely getting people, because for me, it wasn't the initial thing of the class. The class was good that I took back in New York. The guy was great as far as the writing process goes. But 99% of it was the bridge, the permission. So many people don't step on stage at that first open mic out of the abject terror that they're going to do it all wrong, that they're not going to do anything right at all. And so the class for me was just, the first time you're on stage, I teach this. Don't bring jokes. Just bring 10 things that piss you off. Don't worry about jokes. Don't worry about funny. Don't worry about whatever. And then start crafting that. And for me, it was just not so much. He could have taught nothing, but it was just a necessary bridge between scared guy in his house wanting to do stand-up and that very first open mic. So huge chunk of what I do is just give people permission, give people a bridge, give people a community, give people a safe place to try, so that by the time they end class and do their graduation show, they have 5 minutes that they're pretty confident is going to be good. Right. So that bridge, that gentle space, that safe space, to use a word that I'm not really fond of, but to provide that safe space, to provide that place for people to experiment, to try, to play, just makes there's a massive chasm between wanting to do it and that first open mic, and that's my job, right? Over time, can you teach comedy? All right, part 2. Yeah, sure, absolutely. You can teach, my glib argument is, why is it that you can teach ballet? Why can you teach tennis? Why can you teach guitar? Why can you teach singing? And comedy is the one fucking thing you can't teach? Fuck you. Now, right? 90% of comedians learn it on the job, osmotically, through B.F. Skinner pigeon pellets of laughter. You say things until somebody laughs, and then you do that again, and you just keep beating your head against the wall until that audience has fed you all of those dopamine pellets of laughter over and over and over again, until you learn how to do it in your own way, in your own style, right? Great, cool. However, what I see my job as is to not cut 10 years out of the process, but to cut a year out of the process. Okay,
Right.
here's how to, just from the basics of when you walk on stage, how do you talk into a microphone? How do you talk into a microphone? How do you get the mic out of the stand and the stand behind you? How do you stand still and deliver? What do you do with your right hand? Where should your eyes go? Where, who should you be looking at and for how long? Things like eye contact, body posture, stance, things that will shave so much nervousness off of your appearance. It won't make you any less nervous, but it just makes you look more professional, more confident, more competent as a performer. The audience trusts you that much more.
It sounds like what you're saying is the people that are coming along to that are very, very inexperienced. Because I think
often,
the way I feel is it's not hard to be funny, right?
No.
Making someone laugh's easy. Like I've done that all my whole life, probably part of my Irish background and the crazy family I came from. Being funny is not difficult, but there's a real skill in being able to project that to an audience to get them to join the journey.
Yeah.
But the way you're saying about what you're teaching in those initial stages,
those are one of the things. Yeah,
is that there really are people who may be coming along to your class who haven't been on stage at all before. Like, because I'm thinking about it like, someone who's, maybe they've done a bit of stage work, maybe they've done, but they've never done stand-up comedy, because stand-up comedy is very different from, let's say, emceeing or presenting, or it's a really different skill set. But these are people who have gone, I like this, I love this, I make my friends laugh, I'll give this a go, never been on stage before. That some of your customers, some of your students are that sort of entry level.
Absolutely. Big chunk.
Wow.
Yeah, a huge chunk are like, I've never set foot in, because they do it for a challenge, for a lark, for, I'd say about good 50% of my students never really do it after that point. A lot do, or they just take it as a hobby or show up to an open mic once every couple of years. Great. Good for them. But they're doing it also to improve some other public speaking skill in some other way. So there's that. And then, but even though, so I get a lot of students who are on that front, but I also, just recently did a quote unquote advanced class with some students, mix of handpicked people and people who signed up who have been at the game for 4 or 5 years. And I'm still working with them to still help them with the professionalism of how they look and how they appear on stage, to work with their delivery, to expand their toolkit. Like,
so would that be, as you're saying that, I think that would be more of a coaching than a teaching.
Yeah,
there's a slight change there.
Well, I mean, it's all I do is a coaching anyway. It's, give them the opportunity to get on stage, say a bunch of shit, and then give them feedback. Like, correct their swing. You can't. I'm not going to stand there and lecture at people. I do briefly, but standing there and lecturing at people does no fucking good. Reading a book on comedy does no good. Does as good as reading a book on snowboarding. So I don't really consider myself a lecturer or a teacher in that respect so much as a coach is a really good way to put it. But, with more developed comics, I don't know, I've watched a couple of Netflix specials recently where, God damn it, will you just fucking stand still? Their mic technique is all...
Was one of them Chris Rock?
No, Rock. All right, Rock. Okay, you want to break this down? Watch that special. Rock was nervous as fuck. It's a live special, and it's not as polished a special as one he would normally do. It's a lot more immediate. It's not one that he's spent years working on. It's 9 months working on. He's still the best, or one of the best out there. So I was having fun watching. You're right. He was pacing the stage like a lion a lot early on. And that to me is, of course, but what Rock does at his best. And once he's settled in, about 10, 15 minutes in, you can see him settle in. And he does this thing where he paces like a lion, almost as a kind of a wind up to a bit. He'll stalk the stage. But once he gets his groove, and at his best specials like Tamarine or Bigger Blacker, he winds up to move. But when he drops a punchline, it is stock still, fires that punchline with this incredible precision right at someone in the audience, and then just waits and pure stillness and pure control. And it was fun to watch, newer, less developed special. Sure, he's marching all over the stage for a minute, but then as he gets into it and gets into his form and finds his ground and finds his groove again, it's, this wind up to move, bam. hit you with a punch, stand still, freeze during that punchline, keep the attitude, keep the emotion, deep breath, repeat his premise, go back again. Like it's yeah, so but other newer comics, I won't name names because I'm friends with some of them, but they're just rocking all over and the camera can't follow them and they can't, the camera's like swinging back and forth to follow it to get just a tight close up and they're in and out of the frame and they're just broadcasting all sorts of nervousness. If they could just staple gun their feet to the floor, they could have all the same nervousness and be a lot more engaging as far as I'm concerned. But
jumping back slightly to the school of comedy,
sure.
There is that thought by some that you can't teach it. Have you ever
Yeah.
come up against that against maybe more senior comedians in New Zealand? Like, have you ever heard from them you can't teach it, or is it more
Yeah.
supported within the New Zealand community?
I mean, there's a lot to be said for the fact that stand-up is kind of this secret art, right? It's like magic that no one really wants to give away the secret to how the sausage is made. It's,
Right.
And no one really quite, as you develop, we're never really quite sure what your own secret sauce is. All you know is there's that weird alchemy you have between you and the audience. You say this, they laugh. That's what you learn over time. But yeah, I think that is I think it's just an antiquated way of looking at things necessarily. I think there's a lot to be said for good coaching and good feedback. I love good coaching and good feedback myself for, whether I'm learning. I can certainly learn the bass from YouTube. I can learn the bass guitar from YouTube, but I'm going to learn a lot faster, a lot better with a competent instructor.
Yeah.
But I'm also not pretending that they're going to get a Netflix special at the end of their 4 weeks in my class at all. No, this is getting you ready for that first couple of open mics. This is getting you ready for your first year, not necessarily getting you to professional level in 6 weeks. Just that bridge, man.
I like what you just said about it's not the first 10 years, it's the first 12 months, because I hear a lot of comedians saying that they're all kind of dog shit for the first 3 to 5 years anyway, and you don't really know what you're doing until you're after sort of 10 years in the game. Mm-hmm. So if you can just give them it's like that means maybe they get their swing right by year 8 rather than year 10. That's the kind of little help just to give them a little 10 or 20% incline.
But also the thing a coach will do is gives you accountability to write something every week, gives you a writing appointment where goals of, hey, give me 5 pages of garbage, to give you the point of a class. Often, like, I can work out by myself, but I hire a trainer to count for me just because I have somebody accountable to show up for. There's a lot of elements to it. And then, a huge chunk of what I do, if you want to talk about the difference between being funny and being a stand-up comic, 90% of it is economy of words, concision, cutting out a huge chunk of what you say, saying as few words as possible. So my job is to take that 5 pages and just whittle it down ruthlessly into what is funny about this person. Like, everybody's funny in their own way. Some don't know why. Everybody's funny to somebody, and often it's my job to just whittle down and edit down what, and really showcase and shine why this person is amazing, because I think everyone is.
That was one of the criticisms that I always would get. Criticisms, wrong word, coachings, that I always get when I was working in radio. Pat, you're one of these people who uses 30 words when 10 would do. I'm like, yeah, guess that's the Irish in me again. It's like, we love a story. Do you ever come across, we've all got our own sort of lines in the sand when it comes to issues of morals and that sort of thing. Sure. Do you ever come across one of your students that personally sort of offends where you would draw a line with comedy? And if you do come across it, how do you address that to a student, if anything?
Well, yeah, all the time, like almost every day, every class. Sure. What we're trying to figure out there, every open mic, everything, we are trying to find, what's the old the term, the benign violation, right? You've got to violate expectations, but in a safe way, right? And so first, sometimes people are going to be too safe and they're not going to be surprising, and some people are going to go way too far and be more upsetting than they are, and that could be anything from taboo content content that's going to be not so much upsetting to me, but upsetting to a whole audience, whether that's making fun of a woman's appearance or jokes about sexual assault or jokes about things that the people in the audience might have suffered, or, you know, making light of really dangerous or tragic things. But it also might be their personal experience and they're just being upsetting. They're being, you know, they're more trauma dumping than they are being funny, right? So they've done the violation. Now we got to walk that back to something that's benign, right? So if I were to say, how do I cope with it? Number one is, did you feel the audience shut down? All right, this is maybe why, right? This is why, you know, and I'll take an example of a student a couple of years ago where had a wonderful, really loving and very, very clever bit about his wife. Right. And so one class, he does this bit and it just kills. It just lays waste to the room. And it's so funny and it's so loving and it's so delightful. The next time he did it, like a week or two later, he introduced it with a sort of something about women. And then he went into the bit as if she was emblematic of all women. And that the room went cold and it was not funny. And it was...
So it wasn't his personal experience. It was then a commentary on all women.
Yeah. And it was a commentary on all women. And then it came off as really sexist. And so... Right. And so it's just a matter of, okay, well, we're going to cut that line. And if it's individually about how quirky and wonderful your wife is, how great is that? If it's however emblematic. And right. So that's kind of reductive of a whole group of people, whether you're punching up or punching down, is kind of lazy in a way, but also audiences have a tendency to pull back on that. So I think I learned this from a video I watched in and around Black Lives Matter. It's even when it comes to racial material, if I want to address it, I'm going to say, look, it's taking the mindset of, let's make this better. Let's make this better for an audience. But some places they're just flat out no go, no, end of sentence, no, we're not doing that. And that's rare. Sometimes it's like, look, my thought is you're not racist. Even that wasn't racist, but it may have come across as such. Like, I'm not accusing you of being racist. I'm not accusing that line of being racist in any sort of intent. But in that case, the way you addressed it right there came across to the audience that way. Is that your point? Is that what you seemed, because you really seem to be saying this, and it's about perception, not intent. And that's kind of a lot of, like, lately I've been dealing with just trying to change people's minds about how they talk about gay people on stage, right? Just trying to move the needle in that way. And it's not so much that I think you're homophobic, but if the target of the joke is classifying a whole group of people, or if the target of the joke is what a group of people do in bed, or the absurdity of the fact that anyone would have sex with a member of their own gender, then it's just reducing people down to their genitals, or it's saying something about a whole group of people, which ultimately just makes any gay person or anyone who likes gay people in that audience feel like shit for a second. Right. Is that what you wanted? You know? And so I, by all means, pro free speech.
I got a question for you about that.
Sure.
But you can never be all things to all people.
No.
So I'm thinking of this out because one of my questions was to you today, and you've kind of already started the conversation for me. Thank you.
Shit, I was going to wait for an hour, but okay.
If there's stuff you can't joke about, which is always a question, especially at the moment, it seems quite an apt conversation worldwide in stand-up comedy where some people can say, you know, punching up, punching down, things they can and can't say. Mm-hmm. How much do you also then dial into how you are potentially offending some people in the audience? Because the flip side to that, the other side of the same coin, is if you try not to offend anyone, that's certainly going to pull away from the craft as well.
Well, yeah, I think, certainly, we've talked about punching up, punching down a lot, right? I think the best way I can tell it is just sort of an experience of when I was a teenager, starting to come out of the closet, starting to realize my own sexuality in a way, still terrified, middle of Reagan 80s, early AIDS epidemic stuff, just like, really shit time to be coming out, but also a massive stand-up fan, and then going to see Eddie Murphy And,
Delirious in particular.
right. Yeah. And so bear with me, folks, for the language I'm about to use. It was just maybe any faggots in the audience? No, let's talk about faggots. And then faggot, faggot, faggot with AIDS and faggots. And they looking at my ass, faggot. And it was isolated, right? It was really scary. It was like, here's my dad next to me laughing at that shit. Here's who didn't know. And suddenly I felt really alone. And hey, any gay people in the audience wasn't a genuine question. It was a threat. It was, we're going to laugh at you now. And if anyone stood up and said anything, you're going to get your ass kicked. And so that real sense of being suddenly alone in a room, suddenly the only one in the room, and also feeling really kind of unsafe, and also really feeling like, well, fuck, my life's going to suck if this is how people feel about this. I never want to do that to anybody, right? So fine if I'm railing against the church or I'm not railing against the person, right? Railing against the power structures that created the church. I'm not railing against you for being Christian. That's one thing. Punching up to the power structures, not necessarily the people who believe that shit. That's one thing I try to do. But also, I'm really just trying not to do that to anybody. And I have accidentally, right? And so I talk a lot about my own body image issues. I talk about my own weight. And I've often slipped and ended up talking about it in a way that has made fat people feel really shit about themselves. And have been told that. I'm like, all right, well, we're just revising the material. And I often preface this as like, it's not you, it's me. This is all shit that's in my head. It's not, and so, if I've made anyone feel less than, it's really easy to revise that. Like, it's really easy to tweak that in such a way or preface that in such a way. So when I talk about particularly, say, any subject, right, you want to address some really dark fucking stuff, if that it can have one of two effects. So you want to talk about suicide. So anybody who's attempted or lost somebody to suicide can then feel very alone or very, can feel very alone or very threatened or very, disrespected by what's happening in this room. Or you can take somebody like a Jim Norton who can talk graphically about suicide in really, really incredibly brutal ways. But I bet you anyone who had suicidal ideation in that audience suddenly feels 1,000 times less alone.
Right. Yeah. No, I see what you're saying. It's. Let me premise this conversation by saying I completely hear what you're saying, and I agree with what you're saying. Yeah. But I guess I also know the reality of what that means, because it feels like on some level, and you're not saying this, but what I'm hearing is the only way to really try and address that and be as safe as you can is to only talk about your own stuff.
Well,
because then you can't talk about the other people's stuff. Because I mean, like, I agree with what you're saying, and let me make that clear. But conversationally wise, think about the themes around this is that Christian in the audience that just had them whatever taken over, they also might feel isolated, and they also might feel bad. So it's a really, and I wonder, especially in the last feels like 10 years or so, this is the conversation in comedy that seems to have caused the most consternation about what you're allowed to say on stage.
Well, you're allowed to say anything.
Yeah, but the example you give of yourself is perfect. I mean, Delirious is one of those, quintessential stand-up routines. I mean, with your experiences watching Eddie Murphy back then, do you look at that experience now and as a stand-up yourself, do you look at that as still having seen good stand-up, or do you only now resonate with the hurt that it caused you? And even though it was a different time and he spoke differently, is there any part about that which is a positive memory for you about the craft? Or was it all bad?
Well, I had both albums. Like, I didn't suddenly burn both albums at that point. And I don't know. There's that weird reconciling. This is the world I live in. Reconciling that. Reconciling that was going to be part of comedy. Whether that's loving Dice or loving Kinnison or loving people like that. Still loving the craft of what they do. Periodically, just able really over time to just have incredibly thick skin. Love being roasted backstage. You can say whatever the fuck you want to me backstage. To my face, great. I'm more now just having, it's really not even me so much as the potential effect on other younger comics or other more, right,
You're thinking about the 16-year-old you
yeah,
in
in the
2023
audience, not
and have
me.
them in the audience.
Yeah.
Yeah. No, I get it. I completely get it. I just think also this is I don't know if it is an interesting conversation or not, but this is
No,
part
yeah.
of what it seems to be around comedy at the moment with the whole, who is the GOAT? Where does Dave
Yeah.
Chappelle sit? What can he talk about? What about Ricky Gervais?
Yeah.
What are you allowed to say? What aren't you allowed to say? Tig Notaro and Louis C.K. and all that kind of stuff.
Apparently they're allowed to say it. I will say, like, all right, one of the great things I had was, there have been comedians who have said things about gay people in the past, straight comics who have said things about gay people in the past that have been really lovely and transformative for me. Greg Girardo's Built Like a Gay Guy bit was fucking funny as fuck. Early on, it was, what was it? Bobcat Goldthwait's bit about gay bashing, right? And he did this incredible bit about, you're a fag, and you're kind of attractive, but you're a fag, and I can't kiss you, but I can punch you. And it was like, he's laying open homophobia in a way that I found really empowering as a young kid, right? And so a lot of people have said really great stuff about things that aren't necessarily in their lane or about their experience. As a teacher, I would say this, and I got this from a sketch writing teacher in New York: are you reinforcing stereotypes or making new ones, right? Are you genuinely being original? So if it's, ha, gay people have butt sex, well then fuck you, we know, and might be funny to you, might be funny to 80% of the audience, but are you truly being edgy and original? No. You take somebody like Bill Hader, who's straight, who does Stefan. Tonight's hottest club is
Saturday Night
Spice.
Live. That's so funny.
We know that guy.
Yeah.
Definitely gay. We've never seen him before. We have never seen Stefan before. And all of a sudden, a new stereotype is entered into the lexicon, right? He's genuinely saying something original and interesting with Stefan, right? So there are, God, what's the Aussie comic who did that great? Steve something or other who did that great, like, it was really manly to fuck a bloke. And, funny, right? And so as long as what you're saying is both, original and not necessarily isolating, or having everyone see the world in a new way, getting a really new perspective on the world. I just think a lot of people are lazy. I think, a lot of people are just using I sucked a dick as a lazy punchline. And I've heard it 1,000 times before. It's not doing anything new or transformative. And so when I watch, Gervais be so amazing and so original and so insightful on so many other things, and then hammers old, but what if I identified as blank joke that I've been hearing since 1968? Go fuck yourself. Write a better joke, man. So that's an element, like, that's the challenge to comics that I would throw out there is, A, can you make us all feel the same thing in the room? Can you change all of our minds in the room? Can you add something new to the dialogue? Then fine. That might be interesting. That might be someplace to go. But also I will say all those comics who in the 80s and 90s said really, to me, empowering things about gay people were at a time where gay people were not on stage. They were not booked. They were not given HBO specials. And so the only people who could speak for us was the Bobcat Goldthwaits or the Greg Girardos and people like that. They were our representatives. They were our voices. And especially Kathy Griffin, Margaret Cho, was the female comics that were out there who were saying things on our behalf. Well, now we've got Matteo Lane and Tim Dillon and Emma Willman and all these, or Joel Kim Booster, who are all phenomenally different, unique people saying Fortune Feimster could not be any more different people.
Yeah.
Right. Now they've got room to speak. Now they've got a platform to speak. Now they've got big audiences. Now I don't need fucking Gerardo. I don't need Bobcat to talk for me anymore. I got my own mic now.
and Tim Dillon's one of the funniest men on the face of the planet. I mean, his
Yeah.
podcasting that is brilliant as well. I'm reminded just quickly of James Acaster, and it's going around Facebook. I don't know how old it is, but he does
Yeah.
a piece about the trans community,
Yeah.
and he does it very ironically from all these edgy comedians saying things about the trans community, because that's the community that needs to be picked on. We need to take them down a peg or two, don't we? Because they've had such an
Yeah.
easy life, and so he's making the point you're making as a.
Mhm.
I'm pretty sure he is. I don't even know. This is the thing. In this day and age, it doesn't matter. I'm pretty sure James Acaster is heterosexual. So I think
Yeah.
he used to date Rose Matafeo. I think. Could be wrong. Anyway, but doing that whole kind of from an ally point of view, making it obvious
Yeah.
through sarcasm the lunacy of some of these things.
Great. Yeah. But it comes to a point also where, having litigated my existence ever since I was 14 years old, having people, I'm kind of exhausted by the conversation in a
Yeah.
lot of cases. And it's a conversation from one straight person talking to another straight person. I often leave me the fuck out of it. I'm, on that front. But, so talking to students about it, again, you want to, I always say at the beginning of class, we're going to overstep boundaries here. Don't hold it against anybody for going over the line. We're going to go over the line over and over and over again. So somebody going over the line once in an open mic, in my case, whatever, I don't know. Fine, I'll give them a talking to, or I'll make a joke about it or something like that. In some cases, if their heart's in the right place, I won't say anything. In some cases, we're going to, blow up the New Zealand Comedy Guild Facebook site because Neil's exhausted by it. Anyway, that's my...
I notice a lot of your comedy, maybe all of your comedy, but a lot of your comedy has been observational. When you came to New Zealand, there was lots of comedy about observing the differences between New Zealand and the US, like the sweet ass and like the rooting around and that kind of stuff.
Yeah, that's old. I'm sorry. I'm so embarrassed for having a sweet ass joke. Anyway, everyone has one their first year,
Right. Here's my hypothetical.
Sure.
There's a 30-year-old American comedian who's just moved to New Zealand. He hits you up and he goes, "Give me the lowdown on the New Zealand comedy scene now with your experience. What do I need to know to maybe not make some of the mistakes you did? Give me some advice to give me that 1 year step forward like you do to your students, to an American comedian coming to New Zealand to live here." Is there anything that comes to mind?
Not really that I wouldn't give to anybody moving to Tokyo, moving to moving to the Tokyo comedy scene, moving to the Beirut comedy scene, moving to the wherever comedy scene. It's the same everywhere. Show up, do your gigs, do your time. Show up is 99% of it. You just have to be there and be aware, be a pro, show up on time, don't cancel gigs, be friendly, I certainly, let's see, what do I tell my students as far as post-class stuff? Largely, it's the only way to get better is through stage time, period, end of sentence. You've heard that 1,000 times probably in this podcast. After a certain point, I think as I might give the top 5 jokes that I've heard every American has: the sweet ass joke, has the yana joke, has the 2 buttons on the toilet joke, has the
bring a plate.
Yeah, bring a plate joke, right? So we've got all of those.
Yeah.
Please, oh my God, don't use Hamilton as a punchline. And we're exhausted by it. Those are the ones that are just, these are the tired bits. These are the tired punchlines. Also maybe, take a pronunciation class in Toreo, because something I never did and still get. Oh, you were asking, do I ever get corrected on anything? Yeah, Neil gets corrected on pronunciation constantly.
I support that. I support that correction, Neil.
Yeah, I still fuck up the name of every town I'm in, no matter what. Is it Dunedin? Is it no? But yeah, that sort of stuff. But I think if I said, if you come to Wellington in particular, you just kind of have to fight for your stage time a lot more than you would anywhere else. Don't expect anyone to just come out there and hand you stage time. I think you've got to be constantly on the, constantly fighting for, constantly fighting for your open mic time, constantly creating your own spaces to do your own shows, to, there was a bit of an ethos when I first moved here that too many shows are bad for comedy. And I kind of took the somewhat devil's advocate position that I 100% disagree. I think there should be 1,000 shows on a night with 2 audience members. Not necessarily that the audience members are going to have a good time, but the comics are going to get a lot better over the short run. Like, if my interest is in getting comedians to develop their craft, you got to do tons of shitty open mics and tons of shitty rooms. And so what else? Anything else? Don't change your material for small towns. Assume their intelligence. Play to the top of the audience's intelligence as well as the top of your intelligence.
Nice. That's a good. I like that one. And the whole getting on stage thing, it just reminds me it sounds like we've used a golfing analogy twice, unless we talk about different kinds of swings in this conversation. But the way you get better at golf is to be on the golf course. I mean, you can go to the driving range, but there's nothing like being on the golf course and having to actually hit a green and get it to stay there.
If I were to say one more thing to every other developing comedian, is like, is it getting better? Like, a lot of people get locked into their sets early on. They get locked into their 6 minutes and their 7-minute set that they have. Is it changing? Is it getting better? Don't look at your set without rewriting it. This is on Neil's mind right now. Don't read your set without changing a word. Don't get on the stage doing exactly the same thing you did last time. Change a word, add a tag, rearrange a setup and punchline, cut a bit, add a new bit. To constantly improve is one of the things you should be aiming for. But yeah, and everyone's very sweet. My general 4 piece of advice is don't be a shit. And it's 4 piece of advice of don't shit on yourself. Well, that's almost the last one, but don't shit on the venue or the producer, because the venue and producer don't need to have you. They can make more money on a quiz night, so that's nice. Don't shit on the other comics. They're your friends. They're going to be the ones who are going to uplift you and offer you the sitcom deal when they are a little bit ahead of you. They're going to offer you to open for them, so don't shit on the other comics as well. Don't shit on the audience. It's not their problem. They're having a bad time. It's your fault. They're having a bad time, not theirs. So don't shit on them. And ultimately, when you get off stage, before or after, don't shit on yourself. Talk yourself up before, after, and during the gig. And otherwise, you're inviting feedback you don't want.
Just as we wrap up, Neil, last question. I like to ask everyone this, and sometimes it comes during the conversation, sometimes it comes at the end of the conversation. But looking back on your life, and I think it sounds like we're probably of a similar age group. Range. When did you know you were funny? Like, when did you realize in your life that you had the ability to make people laugh and that you were a funny dude?
I think through teaching. The insecure answer is, as a teacher, you make classrooms laugh. That's always fun. I've taught years and years and years, so I got thousands of hours of stage time in front of classes, and often to the detriment of the content I was teaching was number one. That was the sort of, actually physically making people laugh. That was probably it. Otherwise, still not convinced that I am actually funny. Still, even though I teach it, even though I'm a pro, even though I've got a comedy festival show going up, I'm always concerned that this is the time I'm going to be found out that I'm not. So that's a good answer.
Something Survivor. No, it's not Survivor. It's the other one. When you think imposter syndrome.
Imposter syndrome. Absolutely.
Imposter syndrome.
Yeah.
Interesting. It's also interesting to hear that you found out you were funny when you were teaching. Like, most people would answer that. I remember making my boys or whatever cackle with laughter when I was at primary school. But so you didn't really realize it till you were well of the way through your life.
Well, yeah. I mean, as a writer and a teacher, for sure, always got more laughs. I was the socially awkward kid that never had the good comeback at the time. I was bullied a lot. I was picked on a lot, but also because I wasn't witty. And so it was a very good target because people could say things to me and I would just clam up and just freeze in the moment, and would always come up with the great comeback like 2 or 3 weeks later. And the wonderful thing about stand-up is I can write it down like I thought of it the first time and come up with a great comeback on stage. Now, the perfect line is now on stage as if I thought of it in the first place, but I totally didn't. So yeah, I was not the most articulate kid. I was always kind of in the back of the room, off on another planet altogether. And that's what helps the craft now and helps the writing now, but it certainly does not make me a cut up in person.
Hey, Neil, if people want to find out more about you, neilthornton.com. Also, your school is nzcomedyschool.com. Do you want to
Mhm.
tell us a little bit about your upcoming show at the Comedy Festival? A little bit about it, where people can find out more about it?
Sure. Hot Mess on Wheels is a 5 nights in the New Zealand Comedy Festival. Taperiti Te Waha is the theater, May 23rd to 27th. And it's a lot of comedy about childhood and growing up, but a lot of also some potential multimedia stuff about my trip through trash culture and how trash culture helped me as a growing up gay kid. All of my weird fantasy life involving, trash movies like Xanadu and Footloose and Flashdance. As I grew up, the music that meant something to me as a kid, while everyone else is listening to AC/DC, I'm listening to Donna Summer. So what does camp culture mean to us, and why are we in particular attracted to those kinds of cultural products is the overall thesis, but otherwise it's a lot of me being goofy on roller skates and telling a lot of jokes. So.
It's been really fun, Neil. I'm really glad we
Oh,
connected. Thanks for joining us today, and all the best with the festival.
Oh, thank you so much.